Well, this video is probably a little overdue. I've owned this NOBO 10.6 for over a year, and it's been camped in over 100 nights. That's right, over 100 nights. Everything from national parks out west to state campgrounds in the east, even off the grid camping in national forests. And so today, I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, along with my personal thoughts and review. So stay tuned. All right, so like I was saying, I've owned this NOBO 10.6 for over 1 year, and it's been camped in over 100 nights. Now, my situation's a little bit unique. Some of you already know this, but I rent this out on the side. And so if you want to know what an RV is made out of, and you want to put it through the ultimate torture test, then rent it out, because you will find out pretty quick. So I hope this video is extra helpful, both for those considering purchasing a NOBO 10.6 or a 10.5 for that matter. You know, the 10.5 is the same except minus the ramp door in the rear, but also for those that maybe own a 10.6 or 10.5 already, because I'm going to show you some of the maintenance issues that I've had to work with and some of the things to watch out for that could be problem areas for you. And again, I rent this unit out on the side, so it's been exposed to a variety of abuse, more or less. You know, as most of the renters were first-time RVers, and very few had previously camped in an overlander, especially like this one, before. So I'd like to think if a rig can survive the abuse of renters, then chances are it's going to hold up pretty well with the average typical user. Now, Forest River is not sponsoring this video. I have no relationship with them other than being a customer, of course. So what I'm sharing in today's video are all my own opinions to help the community out there. And just to be clear, Forest River is an RV manufacturer, but they don't actually make all the individual components in this rig. In fact, most of the components are made from third-party vendors, everything from the frame to the appliances, and Forest River basically sources those, and then they merely assemble the finished product, you know, and package everything together. So some of the feedback that I'm giving today applies to Forest River, whether positive or negative, but a lot of it really applies to the vendors that actually make the products that have been sourced and put together into this particular rig. Now, every RV is going to have problems at some time or another, so this is not an attempt to bash the rig. And if I could give a quick spoiler alert here up at the beginning, it'd be that the NOBO 10.6 is probably one of the best values out there, especially when it comes to smaller overlanding rigs, and I'd have no reservations purchasing it all over again. All right, so that being said, the format for today's video is basically going to be a walk around, and I'm going to show you the things I like and the things I dislike, along with any issues that I've encountered. Now, you're going to see some things in the video today that are not standard on the NOBO 10.6 from Forest River, and so I'm mostly going to stick to just the factory installed options from Forest River, with a few exceptions here and there. So let's start on the front of the NOBO 10.6 here up on the A frame, and let me talk a little bit about this tongue jack here. So I opted for the manual tongue jack, and my thinking was I wanted something simple that I didn't have to worry about going bad. You know, I've had several travel trailers in the past, and I think I've gone through maybe 3-4 tongue jacks on them, just various times where they fail, either because of water getting in or just the motor seizing up. And so I thought, hey, for something this light, might as well keep it simple and go with the manual tongue jack, and then hopefully I'll never have to replace it or worry about it. But for those who have looked at these NOBO 10.6 or you own one, you'll notice this is not the OEM tongue jack that Forest River shipped on it. In fact, it's a replacement. So about 3 or 4 months after I started renting it out, it just came back one time from a renter, and the gear set was stripped. So you would turn the crank and nothing would happen on the manual tongue jack, and so I had to replace it. So you'll see I replaced it here with this Bulldog manual tongue jack and have had no issues. It's a standard, you know, 5,000 pound jack, and it works great. But the feature I added at the same time was this drop leg on here, and it's really simple. It's basically just a drop leg that slides up into the manual tongue jack, and then it has a little pin there that you can pull in and out. And so when you're cranking up and down, instead of having to go all the way up and all the way down every time, you just take that drop leg and let it fall down. And it's got, you know, I think 5 different adjustment holes there, so you can choose what is best for your height. So definitely recommend that upgrade. You know, I don't know if the original tongue jack failed because of something mechanical or if it was abused or dragged or something like that, but needless to say I did have to replace it, and this Bulldog model has been holding up just fine. All right, let's move to the side of the NOBO 10.6, and let me talk just a little bit about these fender flares on the side. So first of all, I love that Forest River designed these to be stood on. I think they're rated for 200, maybe 250 pounds on each side there. And a lot of rigs, you're not supposed to step on the fenders technically. And so I love that Forest River designed these to be stood on. That being said, I wish they were beefed up just a little bit, particularly in the way that they're mounted. So you'll notice that along the side of the rig here, there's nothing actually physically attaching the fenders to the side of the rig. All the structure and the way it's mounted is actually down below here on the frame. So let me see if I can get you a good shot so you can see what that looks like. So you can see here basically this particular bracket, and this is all bolt-on stuff, by the way. It's not welded or anything. It's just modular pieces that are bolted together. But you can see basically this is an L bracket more or less. So you've got the frame of the NOBO 10.6 right here, and then you've got this L bracket that comes up and then out, and then this bolts onto the fender flares. So nothing's actually attaching the wall of the rig to these particular fender flares. And so the problem lies in that this is your attachment point. Basically these two lag bolts that are screwed into the frame, and then the other two above there. And then they actually have, I think, two more you can see kind of going up, almost looks like they're going up into the side wall, kind of from the bottom going up vertically. And that's what's attaching this L bracket to the frame and making it solid. But the problem is then you've got this fender out here, and the further out you get on the fender, the more weight and stress that bears down on this L bracket. And so naturally it's going to want to tend to bow or flex a little bit. And so what I've found is if you're standing on top of the fender, and maybe you're a pretty solid 200-pound person, if you're standing right up along the wall here, no problem, right? It's not going to flex too much. But the more and more you get out from the wall here, because remember that's again where that L bracket attaches to the frame and is bolted, then the more weight and pressure and stress is put on that bracket down there, and so it begins to flex. And you can actually see when I got this, my fenders were probably pushed out from the factory, maybe a half an inch or so. There was a gap here against the wall. And so I saw that right away and noticed how it would flex. And I said, there's no sense separating it and taking it off the wall here. You're just adding even more force by having the fender further out. So I pushed it all the way up and pretty much butted it up against the wall. And you can see here at the bottom, there's not much of a crack. It's pretty much flush with the wall. But then as you get up here at the top, you get a more and more of a crack, and I'd say we're probably 3/16 of an inch right up here. And so obviously it's flexed enough where it's coming out there at the top. So that's probably one thing that I wish they would maybe redesign just a little bit. Maybe it's a combination of beefing up those L brackets that are holding it there to the frame, or perhaps maybe they actually put a lag bolt through the fender right here into a frame member in the wall, and that would really secure it up very well. I did have a problem where one time, just with I think excessive weight on the fender flares, it started to bend just a little bit here where this L bracket mounts to the fender right here. And I don't know if you can see that on the video, but this is just kind of pushed out just a little bit there from the weight of this wanting to come toward the camera here. And so what I did, I went underneath and well, first off, I had to replace the fender because it got bent. But when I did that, I went underneath here, and you can probably see some rusty C-channel iron that's just up against there here on the L bracket, and then some more up on the portion that attaches to the frame that kind of goes vertically. And so I did that in hopes of making this plane more rigid by adding that C-channel in there, and it seems to have helped and done the trick. Since I added this C-channel right here, and you can see I added a third lag bolt going up into the frame there. But since I added all that, this has become kind of stable, I would say, more or less, where I haven't noticed it bending more. So in summary, I think Forest River did an excellent job on the functionality of these fenders, the fact that you can step on them, and I think they look great. I just wish they were beefed up a little bit so they didn't flex as much. It always makes me a little nervous when I see renters start to step on here, especially on the edge, and then you see the fender flexing away from the wall. So I just wish they were a little bit sturdier there. But while we're down here, let me just show you something that's kind of interesting. I don't know if any owners have looked inside their tires behind there. I'm gonna see if I can get you an angle. If if you can see all the way into the wall behind the tire, and it's not focusing quite right, but I don't know if you can, there we go. I don't know if you can see on the wall there, all that sealant that's just kind of been slopped along that edge there. Notice how when you come out here to the side on your rig, there's this nice bead of sealant, you know, and that's sealing the fiberglass wall down here. There's like an L trim piece basically, and so that sealant is sealing that joint up all the way across. But then notice how when you get behind the tire here, you see it's just all kind of clumped together. And so I saw that, you know, shortly after I bought it, and I thought, what in the world happened? That looks so sloppy back there. And I think what happened is, this is just a guess, I could be wrong, but I'm wondering if maybe Forest River, you know, orders these units basically with a chassis from Lippert perhaps, and maybe Lippert puts these tires and wheels on ahead of time, and you know, they're torqued to a factory spec, and so then they get delivered to Forest River with the tires on the frames already. And so maybe at the particular station where the walls and everything come onto the rig, they don't have the equipment perhaps to take these wheels off and then make that bead of sealant, you know, go nice and even all the way across. So that's kind of my guess, and so they just had to make the best of what they could with the tools they were given in that station. But I noticed that on both sides, so I'm curious if you own a NOBO 10.6, go ahead and check yours and see if it's the same deal. You know, I think that's one of those things where it's not so much a functional issue, it just kind of looks tacky when you look inside there and see how much it was just slopped on there. All right, other things on the side here. Let me just say, first of all, I love these vents. I mean, obviously they're incorporated for code reasons to have ventilation, since this is like a toy hauler and you might have, you know, gasoline or fumes inside the back there. But they're also functional just to let fresh air into the rig. And then of course you have a second one back here. So I love that they're incorporated into the side there. I also really like on these doors that they're flush. I don't know if you can see that here, but they're flush on the floor. So on some of the older builds of the NOBO 10.6, there was actually a lip right here, and so the lip would come up and then the door would start. So every time you get in and out, you'd have to kind of, you know, hop over that, and it would just be a real pain. So I love that they fixed that on these newer builds, and it's just a flush floor all the way in and out. And moving on to the rear, probably one of my favorite features is this giant ramp door on the back with the screen. Now, initially when I bought this, I thought myself and renters would probably make use of it being a toy hauler more, and maybe see more ATVs and things going in the back, and I really didn't see much of that actually. But I still think having the ramp door is a really nice feature, mainly just because of the view you get. I mean, when you back up to a lake or something with a view, that you can just open that wide all the way and then have that screen there. So I think that's a huge selling point to go with the NOBO 10.6. Now, I talked about how the 10.5 is pretty much the same thing minus that rear ramp door, and if you do go with the 10.5, then you're going to get more storage cabinetry on the inside and the back here, and so that's kind of a nice feature as well. Now, the ramp door itself has held up extremely well. They did a really good job of this surface that they put on here. It's kind of almost like a bed liner, like a spray-in bed liner type material, and it's held up really, really well. Looks pretty much like it did from day one. So definitely really like that ramp door feature there. And then while on the back there, just kind of touching on all the LED lights, have had zero issues with all the LED lights that they've installed, from the tail lights to the running lights. So they did a great job there. And then let me just touch on these stabilizers. First of all, I think it's great that there's 4 stabilizers. You know, a lot of smaller rigs, you only get 2 in the back and nothing in the front, since you already have the tongue jack. But I kind of like having that extra stability with the 4 jacks. The only thing I'll say about these is you got to keep them really well greased, otherwise they will squeak. And I don't think it's so much the thread that's behind here. It seems to be more right here where this hexagonal, you know, peg here kind of rubs up against, I guess it's the mounting plate where it mounts up here to the frame, and that seems to be where it squeaks the most. So you just got to keep those well greased. But I love the fact that they gave 4 all the way around the rig. Now let me talk a little bit about the awning, and this is one of the most favorite features on the rig for me personally, and I think a lot of my renters. It's the Batwing Awning. Gives you 270 degrees of shade and UV protection all the way around the rig, and this is an option from Forest River, and I think most people end up with this when they order the NOBO 10.6. So obviously on the good side, it's held up really well. There's no rips or tears, and like I said, it's been camped in over 100 nights, so that's a plus. I think it's also also just the fact that it does wrap around so much, and it comes out almost 8 feet, you know, from the rig. It projects about 8 feet of shade from the rig, and so that's a great feature. So let me talk about some of the weaknesses on this awning, and that really involves what I'm going to call the knuckles up here. And this is like the hinge where the awning and all the poles, you know, rotate in and out. And so these plastic parts here that hinge and then drive into the poles here, they call them knuckles. And those knuckles are designed that if the awning isn't staked down and you get a gust of wind, you know, it's going to pick up this awning like a sail on a sailboat. And so instead of ruining the whole awning, you know, and bending all these poles and maybe tearing the awning, basically these plastic knuckles, they just snap. They snap right here and break off, and that frees the force and keeps it from doing further damage. So I probably replaced these knuckles probably, I would say, maybe 6 to 8 times over the last year from different renters. And most of the time it was, you know, just accidentally forgetting to stake down the awning. And, you know, it's a nice, cool, calm day, and all of a sudden a gust of wind comes along and picks that awning up and snaps it. So if you're looking at getting one of these and you've got the Batwing awning, just make sure you always stake it down, because that'll keep these knuckles from getting snapped. The good news is, and I really like this about the way they engineered it, is these are super easy to replace and they're readily available. You can get them on Amazon, just about any auto parts store online. And so I just keep a stash handy. They're fairly inexpensive. I think you can get a pair for about 15 bucks, so about $7.50 a piece, and there's 4 of them there. And so I usually just keep a full set on hand so that I can easily replace them if I have to. And it only takes about maybe 15-20 minutes to take all this apart and put the new knuckles in there and then secure everything back together. So, you know, on the downside, it will have a tendency to snap up here if it encounters wind, but on the good side, it's replaceable and the parts are easy to get. So I love that about this particular awning. One other downside though, let me come over here to the front where the kitchen area is. You'll see that the shade stops right about where the kitchen slide starts. And so I've had this remarked on by some renters, and they ask, well, you know, what do you do when it rains and you know, you got your awning out but it doesn't cover the kitchen area, or what about shade up there? And so that is one downside to this awning, is that it stops right here. Yes, it does go all the way around the rig and gives you that 270 degrees, but it does stop and does not cover the kitchen area here in the front. And so that is one downside. So let me tell you my thoughts on that. If I was buying this all over again for just me personally, my use, I think I would consider the awning that's made by 230, the same brand of the tent that I opted for on top of the rig here. And they have an awning that is very similar to the Batwing, except it's a little bit beefier as far as the support poles that go underneath here. And their awning hinges from both sides. So their awning from 230 hinges from this side here, and then of course wraps around to the back, but then it also has a second set of arms that hinge on this side here and then fold out to the front of the rig. And so by having an awning like that, you're going to get that shade more in the front here, and it would actually end up covering the kitchen. The downside is, with this 230 awning I'm talking about, I don't believe it projects as far off the rig. So the Batwing awning projects about 8 feet off the rig, and I'm pretty sure the 230 awning, it's maybe more about 6 feet. It's a little over 6 feet perhaps. And so that's kind of one trade-off, but I kind of like the idea of having a little bit more protection in the front there, and it being a little bit beefier to the point where if you forget to stake it down, or you don't stake it down and, you know, the wind suddenly picks up, you're not having to scramble and worry about it snapping those awning knuckles. I think the downside of the 230 product is it's, you know, relatively new in the United States, and their distribution isn't quite as big as the Rhino Rack brand. And so I think if anything ever went wrong with the 230 awning, you'd have a harder time getting replacement parts, at least in a timely manner. So again, that's why I say for me personally, if it was just being me using the rig, I probably would go for that 230 awning. But with renters in mind, I think I still would use this Rhino Rack awning just because parts are really easy to get for it. Now let's jump back to the kitchen and let me talk a little bit about this faucet up here. So for those who have watched my other videos, you know that I've added this faucet here on the sink basin. So the sink basin is a standard feature that comes with all the NOBO 10.6 and 10.5 units. But for me, I said I really think it needs to have a faucet, a freestanding faucet. You know, from the factory, they want you to plug in the spray port here, and then you have the blue coiled hose and you can spray into the basin as needed. But for me, I really wanted something that was freestanding, and so that's why I added that faucet. In doing so, though, I think I created perhaps a situation where there was more moisture here in this dry pantry compartment than Forest River intended. And so after a few months, when I added the sink faucet there, I noticed there was some surface rust developing in it over time, especially along the edges here on the sheet metal on these shelves. It started just kind of peeling and cracking off. And so I let it go for about 9-10 months or so, and then came back and sanded everything down real good and then recoated it with a real thick enamel. Now, I actually went glossy this time just to make it easier to keep clean. That glossy finish seemed to just, things wipe off, you know, a lot easier. So I think part of this was my fault in that I, you know, added the faucet in there, and that created a little bit of more moisture perhaps. And then the, you know, pantry shelves started to develop that surface rust. But like I said, once I got it recoated and refinished, have not had a problem with that at all. But while we're talking surface rust and things like that, let me just show you kind of what this slide out compartment looks like here on the kitchen slide. And you can see close up here, a little bit of surface rust developing along the side down here. You know, some of that could be from cleaning aggressively because, you know, it has to be cleaned a lot, and you can imagine, you know, cooking on the stove here and maybe grease and other things splattering on the side and having to get cleaned up there. So that could be the result of just more cleaning, not really sure. But let me show you one other area here where there's some surface rust, and that is right by that bottle opener. So I hope you can see that in the sunlight, how just right where that edge is, actually you can see that paint is just kind of chipping away here. And so I've had a little bit of a problem there, have not created a solution yet or repainted that area, but you can see there I do have some surface rust. Now, as far as the kitchen slide itself, I've had zero issues with the drawer mechanism sliding in and out. You know, when I first got this, I was a little concerned that over time I might encounter some issues with this pushing in and out smoothly, or maybe bending or bowing where it would get stuck and hung up, but I've had zero issues with it sliding in and out. The only issue I have encountered is underneath here with this drop leg, and sometimes what happens is when you try to fold it up, the mechanism that locks it and unlocks it has given, and so it doesn't fold up as gracefully as it could. And I've got a replacement one, I just haven't put it in yet. I'm kind of waiting for it to suffer more damage. Still works, it's just not as smooth. But other than that, I've had zero issues on this kitchen slide. I think it's a great feature on this rig that all the, you know, the food and the mess stays outside. And let me talk just a little bit about the stove and the fridge on this unit. So this stove is sourced from Suburban. You can see that it's actually worn off. You can't tell the brand anymore, but this is a Suburban branded stove, and it's great. You know, it's small and compact. The only issues I've had with it, because it's smaller, and you know, you have to really use smaller camping cookware on it, and if you put something bigger and that pot starts to get hot and then it slides into these knobs, they start to melt. So you can see here that their knobs are melted. I've replaced them several times before, and you know, it only takes a month or two and they get melted accidentally again. So I think it'd be nice if they could design this stove where these knobs are recessed or pulled out of the way a little bit. You know, I've seen another model from Dometic. It's a little bit too wide, unfortunately, to fit in here, but they've designed it where the knobs are kind of recessed and at an angle so that they're out of the way. So when you have something resting up on here on the grates on the stove, that it's not possible for that to make contact with the knobs. But other than that, it's just a minor complaint, something they could improve on a future model there for Suburban. But let me tell you about this refrigerator. First of all, 12-volt compressor refrigerators are game changers. It's something that's, you know, fairly new in the last 5 years to the RV world. And these are game changers because they actually legitimately keep your food cold, you know, down to 0 and below, or 32, whatever you want it to be set at. And so these are awesome. Now, my rig came with a slightly older model from Dometic originally, and it had buttons on the front just like this one here, but the buttons were not rubber or soft like these here. They were kind of those buttons that are kind of streamlined and integrated into the control panel. And I noticed after a few months that the buttons were actually cracking, and so I sent some pictures to Dometic, and they looked at them and they said, yeah, that's something covered under our warranty, and they actually replaced the entire fridge. So, I mean, it was working properly. There was nothing wrong with it other than the buttons were cracking and getting to the point where it was, you know, more difficult to press. So I got to commend Dometic. I've interacted with them on an AC on another travel trailer I've owned in the past, and then here on this refrigerator, and every time they've stood behind their products. They made the replacement, you know, process hassle-free as they could. And so I got to commend a company that stands behind their products. So I'm a really big fan of this Dometic fridge. Now I know Forest River also is sourcing some of the Truma branded refrigerators as well, and I've heard great things about those as well. So no complaints on this Dometic CFX series refrigerator. Absolutely love it. So that kind of takes us full circle back to the front where we started on the outside, but let me just touch real quick on the 23.0 rooftop tent. So obviously this is not an OEM option that you can get from Forest River. You know, Forest River right now supplies the FRS brand of tent, the rooftop tent, as an option there, and most people end up with that tent. And it's a great tent, by the way. You know, I don't have any complaints against it, but I opted to get no tent on the top when I bought this rig, and instead just get the Pioneer Rhino roof rack there. And then I bought this 23.0. This is the Breezeway 72 model, and I'll tell you why I bought this over the FRS model, mainly for the size. This is a 72 by 96 platform underneath. So I mean, this is bigger than a king size bed, so you can easily fit, you know, 4 kids up there or 2 adults very comfortably. And so really the size of this tent was the big selling point, but then also it has this light suppression fabric. So when you go inside here, even on a bright sunny day like today, I mean, it is pitch black on the inside, and it's really a neat fabric because it doesn't seem to absorb heat. You know, you would think it's all black inside, it's going to be really super hot, but somehow they've designed it where it reflects that heat back to the outside. And so I've been really pleased with this 23.0 rooftop tent, the Breezeway series. But let me touch on just some considerations for rooftop tents in general. If I could do this all over again, I think I would get a hard shell rooftop tent. What I mean by that is, you know, right now this rooftop tent has basically 2 portions on it. So it's got the portion over here that, you know, folds up and goes like this and then folds on itself, and then it has the stationary portion over here. And so once you fold that all up, you've got to come back with a cover, a vinyl cover essentially, that you put on top of everything, and it zips up. It's got straps on it. And what I've found is, because you're so high off the ground here with the NOBO, I mean, underneath here, just to give you an approximate height, you know, I'm about 6 foot tall, and I've got easily probably another 6 to 8 inches above me to get to the tent. And so what you end up doing is you end up stepping on the fender flares, and you end up going from side to side, you know, undoing straps, securing straps, you know, zipping up zippers, and you're hopping around from this side, and then you go all the way over to this side, and you step on the fenders on this side, and then you do something, and then you go back on the other side. And you know, it is a time-consuming process enough that, as you can imagine, I have unfolded and folded this tent up myself, you know, probably 30, 40, maybe even 50 times or more since I've owned it. And it kind of is beginning to become a little bit of a hassle, just because you're up and down so much. You know, if you have 2 people doing it, it's not so bad. You can each kind of take turns on both sides, but one person, it is a little bit time consuming. And so I've seen these hard shell tents where literally this whole side of the tent right here is actually a hard shell, and so when it comes down, that hard shell covers the tent, and then when it comes up like that, that hard shell forms this side of the tent, and then it still unfolds. This platform here still unfolds. It just goes under the hard shell, and that hard shell is permanently attached to that wall of the tent. Now the downside is, of course, you don't have any windows on that particular side. You know, this side over here, there's not another window or exit point, but it would make setting up the tent and putting it away a whole lot easier, because then all you have to do is fold it up from this side, and then they have a little tether strap on most of them where you just kind of pull that tether and it pulls that hard shell down over the tent. So just some considerations if you're looking at one of these NOBO 10.6 or 10.5 models. I really, after doing this again and again, I think I would get a hard shell tent. Now they are a little bit more expensive. There's 3 main ones that I'm familiar with. One from Roof Nest, I think it's the Condor XL. Then there's the iCamp model. They've got one as well. And then let's see, I think the other one is Alpha from Tough Stuff, I think is the name. So I'll put some links to those tents in the description below, but I really think that that's something that I would go with, is just a hard shell tent on top to make it a whole lot easier. Otherwise, I have no complaints against this 23-0 Breezeway 72. It's held up really, really well, especially considering all the abuse and the fact that the renters, you know, it's the first time they've ever used something like this. So definitely recommend the 23-0 brand. And before we go inside, let me just touch on one more thing that I forgot to mention earlier, and that is the fiberglass walls on the outside. So I love the fiberglass, not just that it's smooth and easy to keep clean, very durable, but I also like that they chose to go with Azdel as the backer. So this fiberglass behind it has, on most rigs, a Luan backer. It's like a real thin piece of plywood, and that Luan is wood-based and, you know, glued together with different types of glue and then pressed together against the fiberglass. And what can happen is if you ever get a leak or some water that trickles in, you know, maybe along one of these seams here or somewhere at the top, and it basically causes delamination. And so the Azdel is supposed to be, because it's composite, almost like your, you know, Trex decking, it's composite, and so it doesn't expand and contract like wood does, and it's more resistant to those issues. So I think that's awesome that Forest River chose to put Azdel, especially on a unit like this that might get a little bit more water or exposure to water than an average RV. You know, they could have easily cut the cost down and just put Luan there. So I love the fact that they put Azdel as the backer on the fiberglass. Now moving on to the inside, let me just touch on this flooring first. So this is basically like a vinyl flooring. It's not planks, individual planks. It's just a, you know, big sheet of vinyl flooring that they roll out and put on the rig. And they actually do that as one of the first steps on the subfloor once it's built. And this is actually a very durable vinyl floor product. I have had no issues, you know, with rips and tears. I do have a mat that I provide to the renters to roll out. That's kind of a diamond plate rubber mat. And that way, if they have something that maybe is going to scrape it up, they can roll that out first. But I mean, take a look at this floor. It has had a lot of different things dragged across it and stored here while in motion, and it looks flawless, just like it did the day that I bought it. So I think they made a great choice on that vinyl flooring. It's nice and smooth, and so it's very easy to keep clean. Now let me touch on this screen again. Like I said, the view out here is amazing. My only complaint on this screen is the way it's fastened. And so you'll see here that it's got these very strong rare earth magnets that secure it to the walls, and they are very, very strong, to the point where, I mean, you've got to really grab this thing and pull to release that particular magnet. And so you'll notice on the other side over here that it's starting to actually rip right where the magnet is and where that seam is. And I think what's happened is, you know, over time folks probably didn't know how strong these magnets were, and so they would just start, you know, pulling and tugging and it wouldn't come, and then, you know, eventually that seam started to get weak. And so that's one thing about these magnets. They're nice, but I think they're almost a little bit too strong. You know, I just wonder if instead of having these strong magnets that are spaced every, you know, 16 to 20 inches, maybe if there was some slightly less powerful magnets that were more evenly spread out around the perimeter, you know, that didn't require so much force, then as you grab on here, you're not pulling as much force away, and maybe the screen wouldn't be prone to rip. But I do have one on order, so no big deal. But that is one minor suggestion here on the outdoor screen. Moving along on the inside, I love how they integrated this hidden storage compartment in the floor. Now, it would have been very easy for them to just put, you know, plywood subfloor all the way across the floor of this unit and not make use of this space that's available underneath. But I love how they put this little basin in here and made it so that you can put, you know, shallow things in here. It's not super deep. It's probably only about 4 inches, 5 inches deep, but you can see I've got a folding table here and a bag, and that fits perfectly. Now, one thing that I will comment on is when I bought this rig, it only had 2 of these stoppers on either side, and so it did not have this one in the middle. And what I found is that when you put this cover on the unit and then you start bearing weight, it would start to really bow here in the middle because there was nothing underneath that plastic cover supporting it. And then I happened to be looking at some of the newer 10.6 builds, and I saw in there that they've actually added a third stop under the storage there. And so I saw that, I thought that's a no-brainer. I don't know why I didn't think of that. So I just asked for another rubber stop or two of them to mount and add there. And since I've added that in there, the storage panel is much more sturdy. So if you've got an older build and it only has 2 stops, just order another one and put it in the middle there, and that'll solve it from flexing there in the middle. Now you might be looking at these cushions behind and thinking, hey, those don't look like the ones that came with my rig, and you're right. These are actually replacement cushions that I bought, and they have more of a vinyl, you know, not an absorbent type fabric, but more of a vinyl based fabric. And mine came with originally a more of a lighter beige tan fabric, and the fabric really turned out to be problematic, especially with renters. You know, I would ask everyone to use a sleeping bag, of course, but I mean, I would get these cushions back and they'd have all kinds of stains, you know, watermarks, maybe some food or drink or something that spilled on them. And so it'd be a constant process of cleaning and cleaning and cleaning the cushions. And then I had looked at some other rigs and saw vinyl, and I thought, you know, I really wish I had some vinyl cushions. And then all of a sudden I noticed some of the newer builds of the 10.6 models had these nice vinyl cushions in them. And so I called Forest River up and ordered a replacement set of cushions based on their new supplier that has these nice vinyl ones. So kudos to Forest River for, you know, maybe they got that from feedback from customers or just, you know, thinking through the process there. But I think vinyl makes a whole lot more sense for the cushions in a rig like this, especially just the nature of being a, you know, kind of like an overlander. So those vinyl cushions have held up great, have had no issues with rips or tears. So whatever fabric that they've chosen here seems to hold up really well. So very pleased with them now. All right, let me talk a little bit about these tables and little cup holders off to the side there. So you can see here one that's folded up along the side, and then I've got one folded out. Now these are super handy, super practical. They're not going to support a lot of weight. I mean, they've got some arms under there that support the table, but you can tell, I mean, you're not going to be wanting to bear down or put some weight on these tables. It's more just for something light, like a plate that you're eating off of, maybe a laptop, you know, while you're working. But the only issue I had on one of these tables here, and I think it was actually this table on this side, but I think one time a renter had maybe 3 people sleeping in here at the same time, a small child and his parents, and I think the renter might have been pushed up against this table to the point where, you know, as they moved and shifted, this table was trying to move with them, and so it actually came back and the whole table had kind of ripped off of the mounting brackets. You can see underneath there, there's just, you know, I think 2, maybe 3 screws going into the bottom, and that's of course just some kind of particle board, you know, MDF that's been capped on top and has a strip around it there, edging. And so I just was able to epoxy it back on in place and then put a beefier screw in there, and since I've done that, I have had no issues. So I think these tables are a great idea. You know, it would be nice if they were a little bit beefier, but I think for just eating off of and, you know, using a laptop, something like that, they work out really nicely. And they're super easy to fix if they do break or fall off. Let me talk a little bit about the TV up there. So this TV is not the original unit. One thing that I really liked is initially the 10.6 and the 10.5, if you option it for a TV from Forest River, they give you a native 12 volt power TV. And what that means is the TV runs directly off 12 volts. You know, most TVs and RVs, even a lot of them plug into a standard 120 volt outlet, just like in your house. But Forest River opted to do a nicer 12 volt, a native 12 volt TV. And so you could plug into a 12 volt outlet, and I'll show you what that looks like just back here. And then that would power the TV there. Now about 2 or 3 months after I got the rig, it came back one time after a rental, and the renter notified me that the TV was not working, that it was showing some horizontal lines. And so I thought, well, it must be a reception or something issue. And so I came out and troubleshooted, and sure enough, it was like the whole graphics board or logic board of the TV was messed up. And so it was just showing, you know, scrambled horizontal lines all the way across, no matter what input. So long story short, I was able to get it replaced under warranty through Forest River. I had to drop the TV off at a Forest River dealership, and then they had to work with Forest River and eventually get it replaced. The downside is this replacement TV I got, although it's the same brand, I think it's Connects, it is actually a 120 volt TV now. And I think what happened is this was summer of 2020, if I recall, and so that was kind of amidst all the supply issues with COVID-19. So I think what happened is probably Forest River was unable to get those same 12 volt TVs that they were putting in previous units, and so they had to, you know, substitute basically with the 120 volt TV instead. So for me, that's not a huge, huge deal, because I do have a 400 watt inverter over here along with a dedicated outlet that feeds that inverter. So, if you want to use the TV off the grid, you can simply plug into the inverter, although it's not as efficient as it would be if it was native 12 volt. But hey, I gotta say a special thanks to Forest River that they honored their warranty and replaced the TV. Now I'm gonna shift up here to the AC on the roof here, and this is the 13.5K AC from Dometic that's mounted on the roof here, and it's another option, of course, from Forest River, and you can get a 5K BTU heat strip as well in there. And so I've got both of those options here, and this is great. I mean, a 13.5K AC is way overpowered for a rig this size. So on the bright side, you can easily and very quickly cool down the inside of this rig. I mean, you can turn it into an ice chest if you want. On the downside, it is so powerful, you can probably only want to use it on the low powered mode. But even then, it's only going to run for short periods of time and kind of cycle on and off because it's such a small unit. Now, the fan does run 100% of the time to keep the air circulating when you got it on. But that is kind of one downside compared to having maybe you could argue, a more appropriately sized AC for a rig this size. And then you're not, the AC's running long enough to remove the humidity and make it feel more comfortable in the end. So you'll notice a lot of teardrops. They have these smaller 5K BTU, almost like a window unit that you'd see in a residential house. And so they'll put those onto the sidewall or in the front somewhere. And, something like that is probably sized more proportionally for a rig this size. And that way it runs more and keeps it cooler and drier compared to this one cycling on and off. So I'm curious, those who are watching, maybe you have a 10.6 or a 10.5 and you kind of know what I'm talking about. It's a nice feature. I love having the AC, but what would be your thoughts if Forest River were to relocate the AC and put in a smaller 5K window unit? And my thought would be that you perhaps put it somewhere in the forward bulkhead area up here. So I mean, you've got tons of storage behind the TV. What if you lost some of that storage, but then you had a nice 5K window unit installed there, and then that would even open up the screen. Speaking of ventilation, you can see I've added a fan here, but my thought was, well, hey, if they added a 5K AC, a window unit, kind of a wall unit right there, then that would free up the ceiling, and you could actually, if you wanted, then put a 12 volt powered fan vent in its place that you could use off the grid when boondocking. Those 12 volt power vents are insanely powerful in terms of the CFM, the airflow that they can move in and out of a rig. And so I think that would be kind of a nice trade-off to have the 12 volt power vent up here, and then you've got your 5K BTU window unit mounted in that bulkhead, and you lose a little bit of storage. But I don't know, what do you think? Those watching, let me know in the comments, because I would imagine Forest River might stumble across this and they'll see your comments and know whether that's something they should tweak on future models. So let me know in the comments below. And speaking of ventilation and lighting, I've got everything closed up now to give you an idea of what that looks like. So there's obviously plenty of natural light that pours in through these doors on either side. I like that they gave you a nice big window. It is frosted, and so I'll just comment on that. If you've got everything closed up, you can't actually see out of the rig in terms of if someone's around your campsite or you just want to take a peek outside. You actually do have to open the doors physically. So what if Forest River were to change out both those windows for maybe a deep tinted glass? And I'm pretty sure I've seen a NOBO 10.6 owner do that actually, and swap out the glass there. There's a super easy kit, and I'll put a link in the description below, where you can swap out the glass on any door, since it's a standard size window, with tinted glass, and then it gives you a little shade that goes up and down. So that's kind of a nice feature, because then you can actually see out on either side. But with ventilation and lighting and everything, and just natural lighting pouring in, you'll notice there's this big wall here. This is the driver's side wall, and it's just plain, it's empty, there's nothing there. What if Forest River were to add an actual window here, like maybe one of those acrylic dual pane windows that you see in a lot of teardrop styles? They're kind of more of a European style window. But what if they were to drop a window right there, and then of course you could open it up all the way for ventilation, so the kind of windows that just kind of pop out? or they also have a screen on them and then a nightshade, you know, to keep it nice and dark when you're trying to rest. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. If they were to add a window there, is that something you think you would like on this particular model, you know, to have some extra light? Or are you fine with just having the plain wall, keeping it simple like that, and maybe swapping out these frosted pieces of glass on either side of the doors with something that's tinted where you can actually see out and have a shade with some privacy still? Anyway, that's my feedback on the inside of the rig. And by the way, if you notice some different options like the fan I pointed out up there, or the inverter or the battery meter, you know, of course that looks different compared to yours if it's just factory and stock. That's because I did all those upgrades. And if you're interested, I'll put a card above and a link below for the series where I detailed each of those upgrades. But let me come back to the outside and just close up the video. Let me answer just a few questions. First off, is the NOBO 10.6 a well-made RV? I mean, is it good quality? And that's a question I get from a lot of folks, even renters that are trying it out to see if it's something that they want to buy, you know. And let me just say that in the RV industry, you're going to hear all kinds of feedback on different brands that are downright ugly to ones that are just glowing and loyal to the company. And you know, at the end of the day, most RVs, they really share a lot of similar components. It's just the manufacturer that puts everything together. And so if you think back to the various issues I've had over the last year on this particular rig, the 10.6, most of them are actually due to the components, you know, at the vendor level. You know, things like the Suburban stove or Dometic or, you know, Lippert and so forth. So if I think about the way my unit was assembled and how it was put together, and folks, I look behind just about every panel on it. And I think the NOBO plant did a great job of putting everything together. I mean, it's evident that they care about assembling things in a good quality manner, a good workmanship manner. And so it's apparent that they have quality standards in place, you know, to make sure that things are done right. So really my only complaint on that subject would be, I think, the sealant behind the wheels I showed you. It's not really a, you know, a matter of it holding up. It just kind of looks sloppy, like I showed earlier there in the video. So that's really the only thing that stood out to me as something that appeared to be kind of rushed or, you know, put together quickly. And again, I think it was probably due to just limitations on the assembly line. But, you know, with every manufactured product, you have to make price decisions and compromises to make a product cost effective, right? So it's understandable to, you know, pinpoint some issues like I found there. But I think as a whole on the NOBO 10.6, it's a well-made unit, particularly considering the final price point. And think about this, my rig has been over 100 days camping last year, and almost all of that were renters who had never used this specific rig before. So it certainly got subjected to some abuse, and in the end I had very few warranty claims. Really just the TV on the inside was the one thing that I did under warranty. I mean, everything else was more of a wear and tear issue, and so I paid those out of pocket to have them fixed. Which, by the way, the parts team in the NOBO division, they are excellent. So let me just give a quick shout out to, I think Lacey and Amanda are the main ones that I've worked with there. They do a great job at responding. You know, I imagine they get a ton of inquiries they have to handle. And so if you're reaching out to them, just be patient, but they do get the parts shipped out to you and they're the right parts. So I'm very pleased with the interaction that I've had with Forest River and the NOBO team. Now, second question, would I buy the same rig all over again? I mean, if I could go back in time, now that I know what I know about it, would I make the same decision again? And I think so. You know, the price point is really ultimately what makes the NOBO 10.6 such a great value. You know, second, it checks so many boxes, the versatility and the features that it offers. And there's certainly other rigs that you could consider, and they're similar, and I'll just mention them in case you're interested. I mean, we could look at the Intech Flyer Pursue or Explorer models, or maybe even the Intech Luna. And of course, you've got many other of the more traditional teardrop models from New Camp or Little Guy. And then of course, there's just tons of smaller brands that make teardrops. And then if you go further west, there's a ton of other smaller manufacturers that aren't based out of Indiana, and they make a decent number of teardrop models. A couple come to mind, like Bean Trailer, Hiker Trailer, Colorado Teardrops. There's just so many of them. So in fact, if you're shopping around and you have some other models to recommend to folks that are looking for something in this size, if you could do me a favor and just leave it in the comments below. But in the end, I think the price point and availability and the features are really what make the NOBO 10.6 shine. So in my case, I would absolutely still buy this 10.6 all over again. Now, it certainly is fun to try out different units. So in that regard, I might consider another unit just for the sake of trying out something that's, you know, different. But still, the NOBO 10.6 would be my go-to for just an overall, you know, versatile unit. Well, that is my 1-year owner review here on the NOBO 10.6. I hope you found this video helpful, especially if you're someone considering purchasing the NOBO 10.6 or the 10.5 since they're so similar, or maybe you already own a 10.6 and now you know some things to keep an eye out for on your rig. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, I have done a lot of upgrades and mods on this particular unit, and so if you saw something that didn't come from the factory, from Forest River, and you're curious about how I did that upgrade or mod, I've done quite a few videos in an upgrades and mods series, so I will include a link in the description below for that. But as always, thanks for watching, and thanks especially for all your helpful feedback and suggestions in the comments below. It's incredibly helpful to the community.